Hello, everyone. Once again, welcome to Working Class Australia, issue number 44. Today, we're going to be talking about wages and obviously inflation and CPI included involved in this discussion. It's obviously a very big hot topic for all us working people here in Australia. I'd also too like to acknowledge that I am broadcasting from the land of the Dja Dja Wurrung. I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations people of this area, of the past, present and future, and acknowledge that their struggle was a struggle against invasion, and it's also now part of a broader struggle against imperialism and monopoly capitalism. Well, as I said today, I want to just talk about the price rises. We're talking about the cost of living. It's going through the roof here in Australia. And also, too, looking at our wages growth. Now, just recently, the Fair Work Commission, or the Unfair Work Commission, more appropriately described, has granted a 5.2% increase in the lowest income sector. So that's an extra $40 a week. Big business is screaming murder over it at the moment. They're making record profits, still continuing making record profits, but they are screaming murder over $40 a week increase in the lowest wages here in Australia. And the basic wages. Now, for those of you who are overseas, most people, if basic wage is based around an award, which is basically your bedrock of a basic wage. It really doesn't meet any cost of living at all, but it's an underpinning award that where we base our wage growth from, and also the national employment standards. Now, I won't get into the whole technicalities because I could be here for the next hour explaining that. I want to get to the chase. Now, the fact is, though, this is when I've been in negotiations with companies over the years, and also I'm involved as being a shop steward, organiser, and a general rank and file union member. At always times that our wages always increase the costs of running the business, or actually, better still, beats into their profit margin. But let's have a look at what's going on here. First of all, I want to remind it, we workers create wealth. We create it. Everything that's built around you, all the wealth that's created, manufactured, constructed, serviced, whatever, is done by workers. Not by kings and queens, not by big business leaders. It's actually by us. We create it. And obviously, once that surplus value is created, it gets taken from us and turned into profit for a very small minority of people. And we hand it a tiny little fraction back called a wage, for apparently to cover the cost of our labour. Now, as far as I care, that's that as far as I care, that is actually not the reason why price rises and everything going up. And I actually like to throw you to an article that was actually written by an Australian communist, Ernie Thornton, back in 1960. It was a different era back then, but it was still spot on to the mark. And I'll share it up to the screen, and we'll have a look. The cause of inflation and the answer. And I've shared the link in the description. And if you care to click on that later on, feel free to download the PDF. And he clearly points out, if you look at the third reason why, and the real reason why inflation goes up. And I'll read it out for you. The little screen's a little bit too small here, so I've got it in carbon copy here. The real reason for higher prices, which is so often taking place, is the deliberate policy of the rich monopolies who control the economic life of Australia and also control governments, who are taking advantage of the business boom to make their fortunes at the expense of the majority of Australians. It further goes on. The steady increase in prices is in the interests of the monopolies, for it enables them to greatly increase their profits, the value of their assets and their power, to reduce the share of the workers receive of the national wealth, to eliminate the small business people and increase monopoly. The price spiral is a deliberate offensive of the big monopolies against the standard of living of the majority of Australians. Furthermore, the rich don't suffer from increased prices. They seldom use public transport, so why should they worry when fares go up? They don't eat any more bread than a worker. Even if they are gluttons, they can't eat more meat. Their children don't wear shoes out any more quickly than the children of working class. Their expenditure of necessities is very small compared to their income. So increases in prices make little difference to them, but they make a tremendous difference to the working class family. But that furthermore, and there's a lot more further reading with that. And so I highly actually recommend having a look at that. It's a great little pamphlet. Sure, it might need to be updated and bought on what's relevant for us now. But it is relevant for us now. Fact is, prices are still going up, but we're suffering. I mean, fuel is, we use litres here, we use a metric system, and now already is well over $2 a litre. And even up to $2.20, especially if you're in regional areas where the cost of fuel is even higher, and it's not going down. The fuel excise will be increased again back in September, not back in September, in September this year. So it's going to add further increase there as well, the costs will flow onto other goods and services, which will make it harder for people to afford basic items and utilities, etc. Now, when I've been in negotiation with companies, and I can't name them at the moment, but I will say this: most of them have got banks behind them. They're owned by big monopolies, etc., big multinationals. Most of them, and you've got small, medium-sized businesses as well. But I'm just going to aim for the big monopolies. And when they're saying about adding costs and trying to survive and that, these companies are making monster profits. And just as I read out there in the causes of inflation of that little pamphlet, I think it's basically they're determining the prices so they can actually enter into more to increase their profit margin. And a classic example, I will mention Coles and Woolworths, the two major supermarkets here. They determine the price of all the fruit, vegetable, and other groceries that go onto their supermarket shelves. But usually the farmer and the small manufacturer and small producers are the ones that really suffer from it. But not only those, I'll stand corrected. It's also the workers as well, because they are forced then to try and keep their pressure on to keep their wages low, even though they can't meet the standard costs of living. Now, pretty much since the 70s, our share of the GDP has gone down. Now, during the 1970s, we had very large, high union membership at that time, right up to about 70% of workforce. So, 70 to 80%. I've even heard people said up to 85%. Look, I haven't got the figure there at the time. Let me have a unnamed orange juice. And I think we've got to take into account why a reduction in the GDP has gone down to less than what we could have said in the 1960s and 70s. Well, first of all, was the deliberate breaking down of union power. 1977, we had the introduction of the 45 D&E of the Trade Practices Act, which made it illegal for unions to participate in secondary boycotts, supporting other unions in other industries in order to achieve their goals in the campaigns. That was the beginning. And then during the early 80s, we had the Prices and Incomes Award, which was designed to have a Scandinavian or German style economic model for Australia. But unfortunately, big capital went on the offensive with neoliberal policies. My phone nearly went off. And obviously, by bit, they made taking unions to court for industrial action, suing them, and crippling them financially. And by the early 1990s, it was actually they were more reduced in power. And then, of course, today they are really actually tied to extreme penal provisions such as massive fines, not just the union body itself, but individual workers if they wish to take industrial activity outside of a certain legal framework during an enterprise and bargaining process. Then they're crippling fines as well. So you can see where the situation we have today. And this next graph I'm going to show you exactly reinforces that point. Now, my union actually put out a wages report, comes out quarterly, and it's a very good report. And I'm sorry I can't share that screen up large enough, but here, that's 1959. That's where we are now, year 2022. And when I meant actually our share of the GDP, which was at that time, do I have it in front of me? Yes, I do. I'll have to actually look it up because that screen is rather small. That is around about the early 19... Whoops, I'll go back. Oh. Sorry about that, folks. Right, back here. That's around about the early 1970s. And that was their wage share of GDP. Now, wage GDP was at 49.8%. down from 52% in the previous quarter, and the profit of share of the GDP was at 31.1%, up from 31.1 in the previous quarter, March 2022. But you can see there, that's nearly close to nearly 63% of GDP. And once again, it peaked there about early 1980s, about 1981, 82. So there was a recession as well. But you could see then, first of all, early 1970s, when I mentioned about the Trade Practices Act, you could see there was an economic spiral as well. Workers being taxed, but they managed to increase again. And that was actually through union struggles. And then you could see the assault from big capital onwards. That big drop there was around about early 90s, the recession we had there. And then up again, and it bubbled away for some time. And this is all a consistent attack on workers and rates and conditions. And that's where we are now. So that report I just showed you there is where you can see the decline of our share of the GDP. The next one, that's the profit share of GDP. And it clearly shows, excuse me, oh, God. And it clearly shows, that's 1959, and this is the early 70s where there was high wages. Once were actually where the standard of living was quite high, and the wages were relatively good. The value of wages with purchasing power of workers was incredibly better than what it is now. Then we start climbing up from about the early 80s, and you can see the increased profit margins right up. And what's it say here? Look at the previous page. Yeah, you can see where the rising of profit level even further up to over 31.1%. So it's still quite high today. It was well below, around 20% in 1959, but there we are now. And it could show that now, well, when they're talking about increased profits and more profit, well, this graph clearly shows that for profits to increase further and further, wages have to go down even further. And that's what that happened. And that's what's been happening over the course of the last 30 to 40 years. And we've seen our standards of living. Now, people think we've got a high standard of living. And of course, in the summary of things, it might look like that. But at the end of the day, our purchasing power, our ability to survive is even harder now than what it would have been, say, in the mid-70s. And I think we've got to have a good look at where the situation, how we're going to move forward. I'll just take that off the screen. And if you ever wish to have a copy of that, I can certainly try and send you an email. It's quite a handy little reference to have. So it clearly shows that our purchasing power is rather limited compared to what it was, as I said, 40 years ago. I mean, we've got whole working families now, even here, now talking about filling up a quarter of a tank of petrol to get to work. We're talking about families and both couples working as well, trying just to make ends meet and scrape by. I also, too, feel sorry for the younger generations, especially the Zoomers and the millennials. You've obviously been handed a shit stick again first. And I've actually, because owning a home is now out of their reach. Having a proper career path like our parents did or grandparents did is no longer there. So I'm not trying to be Mr. Doom and Gloom, but there is a way forward for everybody. I think there's a big question, and this is a big question I've got for all workers out there, my fellow workers out there. Do you want to live? Do you want to live? Well, if so, if you want to live, you've got to be prepared to fight back and push back hard. And that means, one, joining the union. The respective unions got the coverage of you in the industries and occupation. You do need. I know there might have been some bad taste. Something might have happened in the past, but the past doesn't have to determine the future either. You'll learn from it. We do any degree build. Team up with other people. And I know if you're in a place where there's low union membership or none at all, sometimes it's good to actually work a little bit covert, get in touch with the union organisation, how to work, because you will obviously have a hostile employer, and the last thing I want to see is losing your job as well. But you do need to fight back. We do need a consistent struggle here. The basic form of struggling is the union struggle, but it's also a powerful lesson for us too. Know full well that we have to develop into a higher level of mode of struggle and fight back against big monopoly capital, which is determining the policies in our life here in Australia, and the outcomes here are not very good at all. So that's what I've been doing, and I've been actually explaining that to workers everywhere. If you actually want to live, you need to actually push back in time. It's not hard. Well, of course, struggle is a long and tedious one, but quoting Lenin there. But I think the fact is, at the end of the day, that's a basic thing, and that's what you've got. I think whatever conditions we did enjoy now are no longer there with us any. Will be no longer there anymore if we don't prepare to have a fight over this. So that just comes to show you, if you want to have a life facing destitution and poverty and just trying to make ends meet day in day out, walking around in that endless ditch, well, that's basically what you're facing if you're not prepared to push back. Now, actors, and that's the ultimate choice. So what the choice is actually there is no third way, there is no fourth way. There's only two way: poverty or a higher economic model or mode of production. I mean. But I've also to refer to it. I put a link into this page as well. Marx actually said too something back in 1865 when he wrote Wages, Price and Profit about wages determining prices, and which is actually was a fallacy. And I'm just going to share this screen up as well if I can. Share screen. If I can do that. Nope, wrong one. Again. I shall work this out in a minute. I think this was it. I had it. Nope. I'll do it again. Yeah, where were we? Here we go. That's what I wanted. Thank you. Thank you for being patient. He wrote this. Whoops. I'm going to close that. Don't know what happened there. Just let me close that. He wrote this in 1865, and this is part 5 of Wages and Prices. And I like this how he's written this out. Reduced to their simplest theoretical expression, all our friends' arguments resolve themselves into this one dogma: the prices of commodities are determined or regulated by wages. Wrong. I might appeal to practical observation to bear witness against this antiquated and exploded fallacy. I might tell you that the English factory operatives, miners, shipbuilders, and so forth, whose labour is relatively high price, undersell by the cheapness of their produce all other nations, while the English agricultural labourer, for example, whose labour is relatively low price, is undersold by almost every other nation because of the dearness of his produce. By comparing article with article in the same country and the commodities of different countries, I might show, apart from some exceptions more apparent than real, that on the average, the high-priced labour produces the low price, and low-priced labour produces the high-priced commodities. This, of course, would not prove that the high price of labour in the one and its low price in the other instance, are the respective causes of the diametrically opposed effects. But all the events, it would prove that the prices of commodities are not ruled by the prices of labour. However, it is quite superfluous for us to employ this empirical method. It might perhaps be denied that Citizen Weston has put forward the dogma: the prices of commodities are determined or regulated by wages. In point of fact, he has never formulated it. He said, on the contrary, that profit and rent also form constituent parts of the prices of commodities, because it is out of the prices of commodities that not only the working man's wages, but also the capitalist profits and the landlord's rents must be paid. But how in the idea are prices formed? First, by wages. Then an additional percentage is joined to the price on behalf of the capitalist. Another additional percentage on behalf of the landlord. Suppose the wages of the labour employed in the production of a commodity to be 10. If the rate of profit was 100%, to the wages advanced, the capitalist would add 10. And if the rate of rent was also 100% upon the wages, there would be added 10 more. And the aggregate price of the commodity would amount to 30. But such a determination of prices would be simply their determination by wages. If wages in the above case rose to 20, the prices of the commodity would rise to 60, and so forth. Consequently, all the superannuated writers on political economy who propounded the dogma that wages regulate prices have tried to prove it by treating profit and rent as mere additional percentages upon wages. None of them were, of course, able to reduce the limits of those percentages to any economic law. They seem, on the contrary, to think profits settled by tradition, custom, the will of the capitalist, or by some other equally arbitrary and inexplicable method. If they assert that they are settled by the competition between the capitalists, they say nothing. That competition is sure to equalise the different rates of profit in different trades, or reduce them to one average level, but it can never determine the level itself, or the general rate of profit. What do we mean by saying that the prices of commodities are determined by wages? Wages being but a name for the price of labour. We mean that the prices of commodities are regulated by the price of labour, as price is exchangeable value. And in speaking of value, I speak of ways of exchangeable value. Is exchangeable value expressed in money? The proposition comes to this, that the value of commodities is determined by the value of labour, and that the value of labour is the general measure of value. But how, then, is the value of labour itself determined? Here we come to a standstill. Of course we come to a standstill if we try reasoning logically. Yet the propounders of that doctrine make short work of logical scruples. Take our friend Weston, for example. First, he told us that wages regulate the price of commodities, and that consequently, when wages rise, prices must rise. Then he turned around to show us that the rise of wages will be no good because the prices of commodities had risen, and because wages were indeed measured by the prices of commodities upon which they spent. Thus, we begin by saying that the value of labour determines the value of commodities, and we wind up saying that the value of commodities determine the value of labour. Thus, we move to and fro in the most vicious circle and arrive at no conclusion at all. Sounds like a tennis match. On the whole, it is evident that by making the value of one commodity, say labour, corn, or any other commodity, the general measure of and regulator of value, we only shift the difficulty, since we determine one value by another, which on its side wants to be determined. The dogma that wages determine the prices of commodity, expressed in its most abstract terms, comes to this, that value is determined by value. And this tautology means that, in fact, we know nothing at all about value. Accepting this premise, all reasoning about the general laws of political economy turned into mere twaddle. It was, therefore, the great merit of Ricardo, and in his work of the Principles of Political Economy, published in 1817, he fundamentally destroyed the old, popular, and worn-out fallacy that wages determine prices. A fallacy which Adam Smith and his French predecessors had spurned in the really scientific parts of their researches, but they reproduced in their more exegetical and vulgarising chapters. There you go. So Marx even pulled that. Just close that. So even Marx pulled that argument to pieces. Wages do not determine prices. Okay, it is the increasing ability of the monopolies further and further pursuit of higher profit. That's actually determining high prices. What needs to be done? Well, as I said, one thing. We do need to have a consistent pushback. We need to be organised, be it unions and community assemblies, elsewhere out there, in one organisational form, to have a consistent fight back against this. But also, too, we need to start asking the question, we need to start looking at the property question. We live under a system of profits in command. Every policy that's put through different levels of government is there to uphold and maintain the rule of profit. That's what we live under. We cannot resolve anything, completely anything, while the system of profits in command still continue. And I just mentioned before, we need to look at a much more sophisticated, a higher economic mode of production. And I will say the S word, socialism. That way we are able, we're able to actually look at the contradictions and resolve any antagonisms of what's affecting us today. And wages would be one of them, one of many. When also there's about countless other issues. Socialism is when all the major industries, the banks, utilities, transport, mines, resources, all brought back under public ownership, and we can also then we can start reorganising society around a central plan, and we can actually consistently then advance human society even further, and also rebuild our countries as well, such as building high-speed rail, proper agricultural infrastructure, dealing with climate change, dealing with all various other issues that have been those are the social ills that have been affecting us while this system we live under still continues. And also, ultimately, too, we can then start also avoiding catastrophic wars as well, which we could be facing at any time. So that's where we need to be we're looking at. Do wages determine prices? Absolutely not. Remember this: all us working people, we create wealth. We've created it. We've built it. We've made it. We drive. We transport it. We even service it. We created it. The thing is, it's taken off us, and all that surplus value is taken off us and concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. And this is why it's such a crazy system now, and this system is so obsolete. But the trick is now, and the real big challenge for us is now to convince all working people out there that this system has to go, and we have to go to a higher economic mode of production. I'll leave it at that today. I'm sorry I was a little bit all over the place in the video. I'm just getting used to trying to do all these slides, and that I'm not the IT genius here. Obviously, I might have to look to do some training. But look, thank you all, and thank you for also listeners in the future. Subscribe. Please share this out far and wide to everyone. Get everyone involved. I would be greatly appreciate that. And if you ever want to do an interview, just feel free to send me a message. All right, I'll leave it at that. Dare to struggle, dare to win. All the best, comrades.